On May 10, 2025, a freight train carrying electronics, mechanical parts, and food left Xi'an, China. It crossed 5,500 kilometers of desert and highlands, arriving in Tehran, Iran on May 24th. This marked the official operation of the first train on the China-Iran railway. Chinese state media celebrated the event, calling it a lifeline for oil between China and Iran, challenging the traditional power dynamics dominated by the U.S. Navy. On social media platforms like Douyin, influencers were excited, especially after June 19th, with many videos suggesting that Israel's airstrikes on Iran were a direct challenge to the U.S. sanctions. For example, a video posted on June 20th featured a commentator discussing the Israel-Iran conflict.
On the surface, the conflict between Israel and Iran seems like an Israeli counter-nuclear strike on Iran, but in reality, it's a strategically orchestrated encirclement by the U.S. Behind this conflict, the completion of the China-Iran railway became the spark that ignited it. The real battlefield is the intense global strategic rivalry between China and the U.S. Iran's $67 billion oil export revenue, which was once locked by maritime blockades, now bypasses the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Malacca through the railway. This not only breaks the chains of U.S. sanctions, but also provides China with a key to solving its energy dilemma. China, which relies on maritime shipping for 80% of its oil imports, now has a land-based backup. Transport time has been reduced from over 30 days to just 15 days, completely freeing China from U.S. naval threats and extreme weather disruptions. The strategic value of this railway goes far beyond energy transportation. As a key part of the Trans-Asian Railway, it is reshaping the trade landscape between Europe and Asia. Oil and goods are efficiently flowing through the land route, creating the foundation for a new trade system. This is undoubtedly a triple blow to the U.S. Sanctions fail, energy homogeny is shaken, and the foundation of the dollar-based settlement system is damaged. No wonder the U.S. is scrambling, viewing Iran as a thorn in its side. The U.S. has been playing its cards well, using the Iran nuclear talks as a smokescreen while secretly pressuring Iran to abandon its cooperation with China. However, as Iran delays talks and advances its nuclear program and economic cooperation with China, the U.S. decisively flips the table and instructs Israel to carry out targeted strikes.
The comments on the video were mixed. Supporters said things like, "This is the true cause of the Israel-Iran war," and "The U.S. wants to destroy Iran's rights to this railway." Others worried. If Iran falls, the railway would be useless. While these opinions are colorful and dramatic, the reality might not be so idealistic. Based on available information, since the first train on May 10th, there has been no subsequent news of additional train services, raising concerns that the debut train could be the last. Is it possible that the project is being sidelined because of fears it could become a target for Israeli airstrikes? This railway project is a key component of the 25-year Comprehensive Cooperation Agreement signed between China and Iran in 2021, and it also symbolizes China's Belt and Road Initiative expansion. The main section of the railway runs about 3,000 kilometers from the Horgoz port in Xinjiang, China. It goes through Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan to Tehran, with about 1,200 kilometers within Iran. Reports indicate that key sections of the Iranian railway are buried in underground tunnels 29 meters deep, costing around 40 billion RMB, approximately $5.6 billion US dollars. The project is funded primarily by loans from China through the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, as well as policy banks. Iran is repaying these loans through oil trade revenues. The Afrin dry port is located about 20 kilometers southwest of Tehran. It is currently the largest freight railway station in Iran, handling 30 railway trains and 1,000 freight trucks every day. On May 24th, when the first train arrived, a completion ceremony was held. Now, with the Israel-Iran conflict escalating, China, which has close economic ties with Iran, is facing huge impacts. Some even argue that if Iran loses the war and its regime collapses, China may become the biggest victim. Not only will the newly opened railway be left unfinished, but China's economy will also face multidimensional and far-reaching shocks, potentially threatening the CCP's rule. 1. Energy security. The fatal impact of oil supply disruption. Iran is one of the key pillars of China's energy security. China is the world's largest oil importer. According to market data, in 2024, China's total oil imports exceeded 500 million tons, with 18% coming from Iran. Due to U.S. sanctions, Iran's oil has few other buyers, with 90% of its exports going to China. Iran's oil is sold as black market crude, priced at $11 less per barrel compared to international markets, and in 2022 it even dropped to $4 per barrel. This discount has been vital for China's domestic refineries, like the privately owned teapot refineries in Shandong, supporting low-cost refining and the petrochemical industry. However, China's heavy reliance on Iranian oil exposes its economy to significant risks. If Iran's regime collapses, or if exports are interrupted due to war, China will face a dual energy crisis. On one hand, Iran's oil exports account for about 4% of the global market, and if this supply suddenly vanishes, international oil prices will spike. Goldman Sachs has predicted that Brent crude oil prices could break $100 per barrel, potentially reaching $120. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, China imports 11.1 million barrels of oil per day. If the price rises by $10 per barrel, it will increase China's import costs by about $40 billion annually. If Iran's oil supply is cut off due to war, China will face huge challenges in finding alternative sources, although Saudi Arabia and the UAE will have the potential to increase production. OPEC has been cutting production to stabilize prices, and Saudi Arabia is more inclined to sell new output to high-priced buyers like the US, Europe, and Japan. Russian oil, due to the Russia-Ukraine war, mainly flows to India, and the high transport costs along the Far East shipping routes make it difficult to fill the gap left by Iran. To make matters worse, Iran has threatened to block the Strait of Hormuz, which will increase global energy supply risks. Most of the oil from major producers like Saudi Arabia is transported through this strait to China. If the passage is blocked, China's energy gap will be even harder to fill. China has about 900 million barrels in its strategic oil reserves, which, according to Oxford Energy Institute expert Michael Maiden, could last for 90 to 100 days at most. Meanwhile, domestic oil prices may rise sharply. The surge in oil prices will have a ripple effect across China's economy. First, the increase in transportation costs will raise logistics and product prices, impacting consumer spending. While China's electric vehicle market is booming, its penetration rate is still only 30%, especially in commercial vehicles, trucks, and fishing boats, which still rely heavily on diesel. The rise in oil prices will directly increase operating costs. Secondly, manufacturing will become less competitive due to higher energy costs. In the first quarter of 2025, China's industrial production index has already declined, and the rising energy costs will further accelerate factory closures and the outsourcing of industries. The fiscal pressure is even more concerning. Local government debt has hit new highs, facing a risk of defaults. To stabilize oil prices, authorities may continue implementing energy subsidies, but this will crowd out fiscal space and exacerbate debt risks. In short, just this one energy crisis could cause significant losses for China's economy. Iran is the world's fourth largest methanol producer and a major source of methanol imports for China. Data shows that in 2024, China imported 14 million tons of methanol, with about 60% coming from Iran. Iran's methanol exports have been severely impacted by the war. The Chinese market has started to panic, with methanol prices surging. On June 19th, methanol futures at the Zhengzhou Commodity Exchange soared to 2,566 yuan per ton, about $357, marking a 4-month high. In Jiangsu's Taicang, spot prices even jumped to 2,700 RMB per ton, increasing by 85 RMB in just one day. On June 14th, the South Pars gas field in Iran was attacked. This gas field supplies raw materials to the Asaluya methanol plant, causing the plant to nearly halt production. On June 11th, a methanol storage tank at an Iranian port exploded, further fueling concerns about supply disruptions. Iran has 11 methanol production units, with a total capacity of 17.2 million tons. Currently, 4 units with a combined capacity of 6.6 million tons have been shut down, and the remaining units are operating at low capacity. This has led to a 46.5% year-on-year decrease in port volumes in June, with China's imports expected to fall by 600,000 tons. Worse yet, the war may interrupt transport via the Strait of Hormuz, further widening China's supply gap. As of June 19th, China's methanol port inventory stood at 586,400 tons, down 65,800 tons from the previous period. Some had previously predicted that if Iran stopped supplying methanol, China's stock could only last for 23 days, but it now seems this forecast was overly optimistic. Many industry insiders point out that if the Israel-Iran war continues, methanol supply could be directly cut off, and plastic factories and paint plants along China's east coast may have to suspend production. Methanol is a crucial raw material for products like fertilizers, plastics, paints, and daily chemicals. 60% of China's raw plastic materials depend on methanol derivatives, and a supply disruption could cause production costs to rise by 20 to 30%. Recently, plastic prices in China surged by 15%, and downstream industries like packaging, automotive, and construction will face price hikes. This will further squeeze profits for small and medium-sized enterprises, with 47% of manufacturers reporting that they're struggling with cost pressures. Methanol to olefins factories, or MTOs, will be hit hardest, as they face total shutdowns due to the lack of raw materials, and that will cause supply chain collapse for polyethylene and polypropylene. Furthermore, it will be difficult for China to find alternative sources for Iranian methanol in the short term. While Oman and the UAE can transship some Iranian methanol, if the US includes methanol in its sanctions, these channels will also be blocked. China's domestic methanol production capacity could be increased, but methanol production using coal as a raw material is costly and highly polluting. Additionally, most factories are located in central and western China, making it hard to meet the demands of MTO factories along the southeast coast. In the long term, China could invest in natural gas-based methanol projects, but the construction period could take at least 3 to 5 years, making that a distant solution. According to Ann Sun, a senior analyst at ICIS, a global chemical information organization, Iranian methanol is virtually the only efficient source for China's coastal MTO plants to consistently obtain raw materials. Therefore, the collapse of Iran's methanol supply would have a significant impact on China's economy. In addition to methanol, celestine, a primary source of strontium, is also affected. Strontium and its compounds are widely used in electronics, chemicals, metallurgy, and defense industries. Iran supplies 70% of the world's strontium carbonate, and its price has doubled from 8,000 RMB per ton to 16,000 RMB. If the supply chain continues to be interrupted, costs for electric vehicle motors and electronics will rise sharply. 3. The collapse of CCP's renminbi internationalization dream. China-Iran trade is heavily reliant on Iran's oil and methanol exports. To avoid U.S. sanctions and bypass the dollar-dominated SWIFT system, the two countries agreed to use the renminbi for transactions. This agreement seemed like a win-win situation, but Iran found itself at a disadvantage as it struggled to exchange RMB for other currencies. This forced Iran to accept China's surplus goods. In 2024, the Iranian Chamber of Commerce criticized China's exports of junk cars, rice cookers, and unsold electric vehicles, with one official even calling the trade relationship a colonial trap. Analysts have also pointed out that China has made significant investments in Iran, leaving Iran heavily indebted to China. Half of Iran's oil exports to China are used to repay debts, and the other half is sold at very low prices, turning Iran into a country that the CCP can control in the Middle East. If Iran undergoes a regime change, the new government may return to dollar-based transactions, weakening the RMB's internationalization. As of 2025, global oil trade is still primarily conducted in US dollars, with RMB settlements accounting for less than 5%. If Iran stops supplying oil, China will need to buy expensive oil in dollars. As of March 2025, China's foreign reserves and U.S. Treasury bonds stand at only $765 billion, which limits its ability to cope with rising oil prices. Moreover, if Iran stops supplying oil and methanol, it will lose RMB income, reducing its purchasing power for Chinese goods. This will also impact China's export market. China's foreign trade is already struggling due to the U.S.-China trade war, and if the Iranian market shrinks further, it will put even more strain on China's foreign trade enterprises. 4. The Belt and Road Initiative, led by the CCP, faces setbacks, $400 billion of investment left in limbo. Iran is a key hub in China's Belt and Road Initiative. Geopolitically, Iran is strategically located at the crossroads of the Silk Road economic belt and the 21st century maritime Silk Road, linking Central Asia, West Asia, and Europe. It is a vital strategic hub connecting China to the Eurasian continent. As we mentioned earlier, the China-Iran Railway is part of China's ambition to extend westward to Turkey, directly reaching Europe. This would open up another route to Europe beyond the China-Kazakhstan Railway, which is currently disrupted due to the Russian-Ukraine conflict. Furthermore, Iran's population of 88 million and robust industrial base make it an important consumer market in West Asia, and China has been its largest trading partner for 10 consecutive years. In line with China's Belt and Road Initiative, China and Iran signed the Comprehensive Cooperation Plan on March 27, 2021. According to the agreement, the two countries would collaborate in multiple fields, including finance, infrastructure construction, healthcare, and defense. China was set to invest $400 billion in Iran over 25 years, while Iran would stabilize oil supplies to China at relatively low prices and allow further Chinese participation in Iran's banking, telecommunications, and other sectors. However, progress on the China-Iran agreement has been slow over the past 4 years. Following the outbreak of the Israel-Iran war, Chinese media has blamed Iran for wavering in its strategic cooperation. They claim that Iran's domestic and regional security instability has made Chinese investors cautious about entering the Iranian market. If Iran's regime collapses or plunges into civil war, China's infrastructure and energy investments in Iran will face stagnation or loss risks. For example, Chinese-built ports may be converted for military use, and the railway projects mentioned earlier could be interrupted by the war. In 2023, Iran converted a Chinese-invested port for military purposes, sparking disputes over the returns on investment. If a pro-U.S. regime takes over, the $400 billion contract could become worthless. The infrastructure investments made by the CCP in Iran may be wasted. Even more seriously, the U.S. could take advantage of the situation to promote the India-Europe Economic Corridor, linking India, the Middle East, and Europe. China's Belt and Road Initiative could face significant setbacks in the Middle East, and years of planning could be rendered useless. 5. Geopolitical crisis, loss of influence in the Middle East, and the breakdown of the anti-U.S. triangle. In 2023, China sought to enhance its influence in the Middle East by acting as a mediator. It played a significant role in facilitating the historic reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Iran. On March 10, 2023, Saudi Arabia and Iran reached an agreement in Beijing, announcing the resumption of diplomatic ties. This was seen as a major breakthrough in Middle Eastern diplomacy, with China's mediation marking a rise in diplomatic influence in the region. However, if Iran's regime changes, this framework could collapse, and China's efforts at reconciliation would be undone. U.S. allies like Saudi Arabia and the UAE may seize the opportunity to dominate the Middle East order, significantly weakening China's influence and diminishing its geopolitical voice in the region. Furthermore, Iran, along with China and Russia, form an anti-U.S. triangle. If Iran falters and Russia remains bogged down by the war in Ukraine, China could face the pressure of Western containment alone. The situation in the Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, and the China-India border may intensify simultaneously, and the U.S. could form a C-shaped encirclement with Japan, South Korea, and NATO. Additionally, Iran, as the core of the Shiite faction, plays a crucial role in the resistance axis alongside Iraq, Syria, the Houthis, and Hezbollah, in directly helping China counterbalance the U.S. and Israel. If Iran's regime falls, that may collapse, and China's strategic leverage in the Middle East would be greatly diminished. If a pro-U.S. government takes power, the anti-U.S. stance may end, further isolating China.